Good morning, everyone. It appears to be 9 o'clock. So, we are in Judges chapter 3. Last week we looked at Othniel, the first of our judges, heroes, deliverers, who's able to bring Israel out of the suffering and the oppression that they were dealing with. Othniel was our archetypal judge. He is the best out of all of them as far as character and actions go. There is nothing in the narrative of Othniel that gives you any reason to complain, any reason to criticize. And from here on out, we're going to take incremental steps down. Now, I say that, I don't want us to overreact in that, because Ehud is still a mostly, almost entirely noteworthy and righteous judge himself. But the story at least gets a little weirder with Ehud than it did with Othniel. And that will be interesting for us to see as well. So Judges chapter 3, beginning in verse 12. Let's look at question number... Well, we'll go ahead and read it. That'll be fine. Verse number 12. And the people of Israel again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord strengthened Eglon, the king of Moab, against Israel, because they had done what was evil in the sight of the Lord. He gathered to himself the Ammonites and the Amalekites, and went and defeated Israel. And they took possession of the city of palms. And the people of Israel served Eglon, the king of Moab, 18 years. Then the people of Israel cried out to the Lord, and the Lord delivered up for them a deliverer, Ehud, the son of Gera, the Benjaminite, a left-handed man. The people of Israel sent tribute by him to Eglon, the king of Moab. And he had made for himself a sword with 2 edges, a cubit in length, and he bound it on his right thigh under his clothes. And he presented a tribute to Eglon, king of Moab. Now Eglon was a very fat man, and when Ehud had finished presenting the tribute, he sent away the people who carried the tribute. But he himself turned back at the idols near Gilgal and said, I have a secret message for you, O king. And he commanded, silence. And his attendants went out from his presence. And Ehud came to him as he was sitting alone in his cool roof chamber. And Ehud said, I have a message from God for you. And he arose from his seat. And Ehud reached with his left hand, took the sword from his right thigh, and thrust it into his belly. And the hilt also went in after the blade, and the fat closed over the blade, for he did not pull the sword out of his belly, and the dung came out. Then Ehud went out into the porch, and closed the doors of the roof chamber behind him, and locked them. When he had gone, the servants came, and when they saw that the doors of the roof chamber were locked, they thought, surely he is relieving himself in the closet of the cool chamber. And they waited till they were embarrassed, but he still did not open the doors of the roof chamber. They took the key and opened them, and there lay their lord dead on the floor. Ehud escaped while they delayed, and he passed beyond the idols and escaped to Seirah. And when he arrived, he sounded a trumpet in the hill country of Ephraim. Then the people of Israel went down with him from the hill country, and he was their leader. And he said to them, follow after me, for the Lord has given your enemies the Moabites into your hand. So they went down after him and seized the fords of the Jordan against the Moabites, and did not allow anyone to pass over. And they killed at that time about 10,000 of the Moabites, all strong, able-bodied men. Not a man escaped. So Moab was subdued that day under the hand of Israel, and the land had rest for 80 years. Very interesting story for a lot of reasons. Favorite of middle school Bible classes everywhere. But it is a fascinating one for a lot of reasons. Question number 6, why were the people of Israel oppressed? Because they sinned. I'll give you a little spoiler now. We're going to ask this question in every lesson that we have here in Judges. It's going to be the same answer every time. Because they sinned. Because they again did evil in the sight of the Lord. Now, I know it's repetitive for us to keep saying this, but the repetition is here in the book of Judges to establish a point. Things go well for Israel when they are acting in a righteous way and following God. And when they sin, when they leave God, everything falls apart. So yes, they have again done evil in the sight of the Lord. What was God's response to that? To them doing evil?
He gave them a deliverer.
Before he gave them a deliverer, he gave them into the hands of some oppressors who are going to make life difficult for them. So in this case, it's Eglon and the Moabites, and Moab allies with Ammon and Amalek, and they come and they make life very difficult for Israel for some time. They take possession of the city of Palms. Does anybody know what the city of Palms is?
Possibly Jericho.
Yeah, it does seem to be Jericho. And there's some symbolism there in the fact that Jericho was like the first great victory in the conquest of the land of Canaan, and now it's taken right back. They've lost control of this. So in a way, you kind of ask, what was the point of the whole account in the book of Joshua where God gives them the city of Jericho, this great fortress, if it can so easily be taken back from them? Remember that if Jericho was hard for the Israelites to attack, or hard for anyone to attack, it would also be easy for them to defend, yet it doesn't seem particularly easy for them to defend here. Eglon and the Moabites come and quite easily take it away from Israel. And Israel has to endure this service to Eglon for 18 years. So a very difficult couple of decades. Oh, yes.
Oh, just a side note before,
Sure.
a lot of people, and I just learned this recently, feel like left-handed people are condemned by God.
Mm-hmm.
And when I heard that, and I'm sure it's just something people have stirred up to make people look superstitious,
Yeah.
but I looked up left-handed people in the Bible, and there's only 2 places in the Old Testament where it mentions left-handed people, and both of them are that they were good fighters.
Yeah.
I don't know where people get these ideas from, or if it's something that it's just something somebody made up because they.
Yeah, it's an old superstition that a lot of cultures have had, that left-handed people are untrustworthy or deceitful. You don't know what they're going to do. There were some cultures that trained fighters to be left-handed. They would get them from a very, very young age and like bind their right hand to their side so that they couldn't learn to use it, and force them to be left-handed because it would make them a better fighter. They would have, if everybody is right-handed, then everything's kind of built around protecting attacks from that side. And if you can have somebody who's able to attack from another side, then that would be particularly dangerous. Kathy?
I read that because he was left-handed, that King Eglon thought that his right hand was weak, and that's the only reason that he would let him in his chamber.
Yeah.
Anyway, I just read that.
Yes, so if Ehud rather is like using his right hand as a show of basically how weak he is. Imagine if you're trying to use your offhand in a bunch of things. That's a way to show, oh, I'm not very coordinated, I'm not very threatening. It's going to be easy for Eglon to invite him into his chamber. He doesn't seem to have any hesitation in allowing Ehud to be alone with him. If Ehud's this great intimidating fighter, he's not going to let that happen.
Well, typically also they would strap their swords or their blade on their left side because they're mainly right-handed.
Right.
And if he had his on the right side, it wouldn't be something they would typically search for.
Right, yes. They're kind of patting him down. They would really search the one side, which kind of seems funny to me. But you've got the blade on the opposite thigh. And so if there's no blade there, then he's going to be safe. Except if he's left-handed, he's going to grab it from the other side. And now you have that danger again. There's a lot of deceit and trickery involved in this story, and even though there's nothing really that condemns Ehud for anything he's doing, it at the very least causes us to raise an eyebrow more than it did with Othniel. Because Othniel, he just overpowers the enemies of the Lord. Ehud is still righteous and still bringing about deliverance pretty easily, but he does it through all of these backhanded means. And so that's just a little bit of slight moral grayness that you at least go, this is unusual. And that theme is going to develop as we continue on in Judges as well. So how did God deliver Israel in question number 7?
Mom already answered that.
Yeah, he raised up a deliverer for them. That's another one of those questions that we're going to keep asking and keep getting the same basic answer to. God raises up a deliverer for them. That's part of the cycle that we have here. They're in great distress. God hears their cry of pain and stress, and he raises up a deliverer for them. So let's talk about how that happened with the story of Ehud. As we mentioned, Ehud is a left-handed man, so he has an opportunity to be particularly tricky with his assassination, to be skilled in a way that another man would not be. But the people are sending a tribute to Eglon. Since he is kind of ruling over them, he's demanding a tribute from them, and periodically they're having to get a large amount of goods and money and such and deliver that to Ehud. So somebody has to come and do that. So typically you're going to send somebody who's not a threat. You can't send warriors in. Eglon's not going to allow that. Instead, you're going to send somebody, a group of people who can be just basic couriers at this point. And Ehud is going to be one of this group. There's more than just him, at least initially, but he's the one that we're focusing on in this story. So he makes a dagger for himself. It calls it a sword here. It's pretty small. It's said to be a cubit in length. So on the high end of a cubit, that's about 1.5 feet. So that's the longest that this sword would have been, really making it a dagger. And he's making it for a particular purpose. He's made it double-edged so that it can penetrate easily. He's made it to a very specific length for one specific man. And he's got that strapped, like we said, to his right thigh, because you're going to grab it from the opposite thigh, and that's going to be easily hidden and hopefully not noticed by the guards who are protecting Eglon. So they come and they bring all this tribute, Ehud and all these other couriers who are there. They deliver that, nothing unusual happens, and they start to leave. But as they get some distance away, when they pass by some of the idols at Gilgal, Ehud stops and he turns back. He goes back to Eglon. So he's feigning that he has gotten some kind of message, some kind of warning or sign from these idols there at Gilgal. And Eglon's a superstitious man. When Ehud comes back and he says, "I have a message from the Lord for you," he can't help but want to hear that. You can't turn that away. You got to hear what the gods are going to tell you. And he was just passing by those idols at Gilgal. Maybe they really did speak to this Israelite courier. And so he does what seems like a very bad move on a personal security front. He dismisses everyone else who's in the room, all the guards, all of the attendants. This is a special message from a divine being, and it can't be heard by anyone else. So Eglon's arrogance and intense curiosity are going to be his undoing here, as he dismisses anyone who might be able to protect him from the threat of Ehud. So Ehud kind of leans in to whisper this message to Eglon. But as he does so, he draws the blade and he plunges it into Ehud. And it is said that Ehud, well, I mean, Eglon, I've been mixing up Ehud and Eglon the whole time. You're just going to have to know who I'm talking about. Okay, they both start with E, so Ehud does not commit suicide in front of Eglon. He plunges it into Eglon. And it is said that Eglon was a very fat man. And so you get quite the mental image here. As he has plunged this dagger, it is, roughly 18 inches long and is able to penetrate all the way into Eglon's body and to be kind of consumed into that. That is a pretty large man. And Ehud does not pull it back out. Instead, he just plunges it in as deep as it will go, and it just kind of gets pulled into Eglon's body where it stays. As he dies, it says that he loses control of his bowels as he died. His bowels release. It's made quite a mess, quite a bloody and violent death scene here, given with an alarming level of detail, but it certainly gives quite the mental image. There's some sacrificial language to all of this. So the word that is used for Eglon being a fat man, and talking about how the blade penetrated the fat and was held there, that's the same word used to describe the best part of the animal sacrifices that they did in the tabernacle and the temple later on, of course. That it was the fat of those animals that was given as a burnt offering to the Lord. And so you have a play on words here showing that Eglon is not just being killed, but being offered up as a sacrifice in the same way that you offer up an animal. Quite the deliverance here for sure. Is embarrassing and total defeat for Moab. Ehud, the way that he escapes, he leaves, he locks the door behind him, and he just walks right on out. He goes by those idols at Gilgal again, gets all the way back, and there's some embarrassment that is given here for exactly how the servants go about finding that Eglon has died. So when Ehud leaves, they don't think anything of it. That all seems normal. They've not been summoned back into the presence of the king yet. That's no big deal. But what they assume, basically, is that Eglon is using the restroom, that he is up there on the roof in the cool chamber, and that he is relieving himself. And this goes on for quite some time, to the point that they start thinking, wow, the king is a bit constipated today, right? What's going on here? And then it's getting to be longer and longer until eventually they're embarrassed and start thinking, maybe there's something wrong. But still, they're kind of trying to wait. They try to open the door. They realize that it's locked. They realize something could be wrong here. What do we need to do? They go and they fetch a key. All this has taken time. They get in there and they go up to that rooftop chamber and they see, yes, Eglon has been killed. So all of this is a very embarrassing and dishonorable way for Eglon to die. He doesn't get to die in battle, die in some brave and noble way. He dies to the underhanded efforts of an Israelite. He dies with everybody thinking that he's taking an especially long time on the toilet. This is a blow to a king. And I'm saying it like this because there's a lot of details in this story that underscore the embarrassment of Moab. And that is a point here. Just like we saw that Israel had no capability of defending Jericho, no capability of defending themselves, so long as they were working against God. Moab's able to come in, to take Jericho easily, to take all of them easily, to hold violence over their heads for 18 years. But then once God is going to deliver them, it's not going to happen through a grand and noble battle. It's not going to happen through Moab fighting with vigor and honor. It's going to happen through a very embarrassing and dishonorable defeat. And that is quite a blow to the reputation of Moab, and shows that in all of this, it's God who is in control. God is going to have his name glorified no matter what. What are your thoughts or questions on any of that so far? Yeah, Kathy.
I was wondering about the stone images at Gilgal, because the Israelites took 12 stones and put them at Gilgal, and Gilgal seemed to be a place of remembrance for Israel, and a place, not of maybe worship, I don't know if they built an altar there, but something there was special to them. And I was surprised that the stone images were at Gilgal.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing was that the message that Ehud gave, well, he said it was from God in verse 20.
Yeah.
So the message was from God, and the people around King Eglon had to realize that when Ehud went past the stone images, that the stone images couldn't do anything, and yet Ehud is going to give them a message from God. So that just, I couldn't really put all that together.
Okay.
It made me more curious.
Yeah, so let's put that together. Yeah, so Gilgal was an important site to Israel, but in the superstition that these peoples had, they tended to attach importance to certain places. If there was a sacred place to one group of people, even another group would think that there is a connection with the supernatural here, a connection with the divine. And so what the Israelites used as a place of remembrance in this time is basically converted to a place of idolatry as well. They've not lost the fact that it's a spiritual place, an important place in that regard, but the target of their worship or their remembrance has changed. So yes, in this same place where it was supposed to be a place of remembrance, now they have idol worship happening. Some of that would have been instigated by Moab, but a lot of that by Israel as well, because even before Moab came along, remember the whole impetus for all of this was that Israel had done evil again in the sight of the Lord. They were worshiping idols. And so they're going to all the same places, but they're doing some very different things. So adding on to that then, when Ehud passes by, and there are these graven images, and the word there is really graven images, idol, so it's not referring exactly to the stones of remembrance, but to idols that they have set up in this place. You're right that nobody else would have heard anything. It's not like there was a voice from heaven that spoke where it was clear that Ehud was given a message. But they absolutely would have believed that Ehud could have gotten a secret message there through some sort of divine force working on him, given some kind of special knowledge that he was supposed to go pass on to Eglon. That was a common theme in a lot of idolatry. You had the concept of a prophet or an oracle who can get this message from a god and can go bring it to whoever they need to bring it to. And he does say, I have a secret message for you, and that this is a message from God for you. But that word for God it is God. He is referring to Yahweh, but he's not said Yahweh there. He's not specifically identified the God of the Israelites. He's used the more generic word God. He's used Elohim there. And Eglon's going to take that to not mean the Israelite God, but to mean some God that they are worshiping. So again, it's a little bit of underhandedness, a little bit of deception, that Ehud does have a message from God. The message happens to be a dagger, but what he's leading Eglon on to believe is that there's a verbal message from one of the gods that he worships. Does that make sense? Yeah? Kay, you had your hand up before?
Yeah, I just want to say I read someplace that Eglon means, the word means calf. So
Yeah.
that would fit in well with the sacrifice.
Yes, right back into that sacrificial language, that he is offered up like the fatted calf, in this case very much a fatted calf, being offered up to God. What once was a scourge and a punishment against Israel now becomes a sacrifice to God because Israel has cried out to the Lord. What else? Okay. So Ehud has run off, and that's great that we've killed Eglon, but where do you go from here? That doesn't necessarily free them from the rule of the Moabites. We need to fully be freed from them. And so Ehud goes out into Israel, and he rallies the people. He says, "Follow after me, for the Lord has given your enemies, the Moabites, into your hand." And he's able to give them a very solid message, a solid call this way, in saying, Eglon's already dead. We just now need to finish the job and to rout the Moabites, to send them packing, and we'll be able to be free again. And the Israelites are emboldened. They do join Ehud in this. And in the ensuing battle, they kill 10,000 Moabite soldiers, and they achieve a great victory over them. Again, the theme here is that it is an embarrassing defeat for Moab. They are not able to withstand Israel at all. And they had just conquered that fortress. They had just conquered Jericho 18 years prior, and now they're falling flat on their faces and they're being destroyed. And so Moab is subdued. They are driven out from the Israelites. Israel has control over Jericho, over this area once more, and they have 80 years of rest in Israel. So this is one case where we actually have an enhancement from Othniel down to Ehud. Remember, in general, we're seeing kind of a slow decline, but Othniel gave 40 years of rest, roughly the one generation of rest. Now Ehud is giving 80 years. It's the 2 generations of rest. Okay.
I was wondering if that might include Shamgar.
And that might include Shamgar. That's the other part of that makes it mildly difficult to know the way some of these overlap and kind of weave into each other. That may include Shamgar as well, just with the way this narrative is written. Even still, though, like they're able to get a good, solid amount of rest from this. This is lasting for 2 generations where they know God again, and they're worshiping and serving God to some degree, at least. And they're not doing evil in the sight of the Lord, and they're not being oppressed. Thoughts or questions on any of this so far? So Ehud raises some questions for us. I mentioned that Othniel is the ideal judge. He is the archetype. Everything that Othniel did was good. Everything that we ever know about Othniel is good. Every time he's mentioned in Scripture, which is not a lot, sure, but everything about him is good. Every example is him serving God appropriately, standing up for the truth and for righteousness, being bold and courageous. Every single thing about Othniel was a positive example. And so because of that, it is through the sheer power of the Lord and the righteousness of Othniel that he's able to deliver them. And it's a simple overpowering of their enemies. Ehud, it got a little bit more interesting. It made for a much more fascinating story for us to read and for us to learn about, but it does at least raise some questions. Instead of just overwhelming the enemy, Ehud's skulking around. He's having to do this kind of deceptive strategy of sneaking in and giving the tribute, but having this blade that he has hidden, and then assassinating Eglon, not on the field of battle, but here in secret in his own chamber. And then he's got to run away, pretending that everything is still okay and trying to buy some time before there can finally be the open battle in the end. So Ehud he's delivering the people with more deception and more that kind of moral grayness than we saw with Othniel. Yet, at the same time, God did raise him up. There is no overt criticism of Ehud here. There's nothing that says that what he did was wrong. It was a deliverance, and it was from God. And so he is still generally a positive example and gives a positive result. All that I want you to get from Ehud in the macro sense, as far as where he fits in the decline, is that we've gone from a very obviously good deliverance to a good deliverance that causes us to raise an eyebrow. Do you understand what I mean by that? I don't want to be overly critical of Ehud here, but there is at least the raised eyebrow of how exactly he went about this. What are your thoughts on that, Mark?
Yeah, I think we're going to find these deliverers looking for some proof before they want to do stuff.
Right.
But just, I look at this thing where he's by these idols, and I'm kind of with Kathy on this. I'm trying to reconcile the story itself. We don't see that the people going with him are actually in cahoots with him. Do they even know that what he's going to do? This seems to be something he's doing on his own.
Yes.
And he's not really going to do it until he sees those idols. Maybe they remind him of something. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's really difficult to know, but for some reason we see this implication 2 times, this difference of these idols. And I think it goes back to exactly what you're saying. God is in control. These
Right.
idols are useless.
Right.
But it's kind of hard to reconcile for me in my own mind. If this was his own doing, because he sends those people away,
Yeah.
and he goes back by himself, maybe he just understands this is something I have to do. This is something God's making me do on my own. There's a lot of detail in here about the killing, but not about the character going on or the thoughts.
Right.
in his head.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I mean. Like, we have so much more detail about, like, the actual physical assassination of it. I mean, to the point that it's kind of absurd how much detail there is on the way the blade enters into Ehud's body, while we still are left with some of these questions of, is this exactly what, like, did God tell Ehud to do it this way? That's a little unclear to me. We don't see anything of God specifically telling Ehud, I want you to make this dagger, I want you to go and to deliver the tribute and then to come back by yourself with this fake message from the idols. God, at the very least, has kind of taken a back seat in the narrative of this. which is a little different than what we see in some of the others. So that's what I mean by like the grayness of it all, but it's just a little weird how this works out. Was this Ehud's plan from the beginning? Or did he make part of that up on the spot? Was this directed to him by God? Or is God delivering the people through a man who's going to act in some deceptive, maybe even kind of evil ways? That seems like an overstatement, but maybe. And then that God can use the evil for good. It, at the very least, seems to be a little bit awkward. Kathy?
I just can't see that he was wrong in doing this because of what Mark said, the idol. Once he saw that, it's like, you can't stand it.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. And my question to myself was, remember when the people on the west side went over to fight with the people on the east side, and when they returned, they put that big shrine up there so that the children would remember
Yeah.
the Lord?
Right.
And I was wondering if these idols were up at that point, or did King Eglon put these idols up when he took over? I'm trying to figure that out because then the Israelites would be really shocked to find these idols at Jericho.
Yeah. No, I think Israel put these idols up because that's.
I'm sorry.
I think Israel put these idols up.
No, Israel put the idols up.
Yeah, because that was so much of why the doing evil again in the sight of the Lord. So it doesn't mention specifically in this case, but in most of the cases in the book of Judges, the evil is detailed a little bit more in saying that they returned to the worship of idols and they set up these graven images in the high places and all of these things that angered God as why are you worshiping idols? So Moab may have set up some of these themselves. But it makes a lot of sense that Israel would go to their own place of remembrance, their own holy place, and now distort it for the use and the worship of idols. And then the Moabites are okay with this because, well, they're pretty free in the number of gods that they worship, and Israel's borrowing these gods from the nations around them, some of those probably including Moab. So Moab's not seeing this as a bad thing that these idols are here, and in fact probably have some respect for those idols and may even worship some of those same idols because they're part of their own pantheon as well. It's part of the decline of Israel that this happens, and we see it beyond the book of Judges as well, how when there's a good king that rises up, that he's having to tear down these altars and these graven images in the high places throughout Israel. There are these sacred spots that Israel keeps going back to, the superstition of that this is a special place where you contact the divine, contact the supernatural. And they're constantly needing to tear down idols that are being put up there. So I see that as that, and that wouldn't have been a surprise to Ehud to see that there. He knew that that was there. What I see more is some savviness here on Ehud's part to wait until he is in the vicinity of the graven images and to use that as an excuse to then turn back, to pretend that he's gotten some kind of message from those idols. So whether there's some righteous anger in that as well, that, as Mark was saying, was he making this up on the spot? Quite possibly. When he realized that there wasn't a real opportunity to assassinate Eglon there in that moment where they're delivering the tribute, now we need to find an excuse to go back. Would some righteous anger be the impetus to then turn back? Maybe so. Regardless, the thing with Ehud to me is that we're left with some of these questions. On some of the other judges, God says specifically, go and do this. Do it this way. Like even with Gideon, and Gideon's a mess, God specifically tells Gideon how to deliver the people. Here, if God has specifically told Ehud, it's not given to us. Like, that's not exactly explained. Dave?
Well, first off, I would say we need to be careful not to go overboard with speculation.
Yeah.
No way of proving it. What we do know is, historically, God has used death as a messenger.
Yes.
And so, when I read these, he said, God has a message for you. I take that verbatim that God somehow got that message.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things that comes into my mind is that possibly he wanted to demoralize, and that's the perfect way to do it.
Yeah.
They see him like that, it's disgusting, and it's
Yeah.
demoralizing.
Yeah.
But I don't know if it was an evil thing, and I would be leery, of speculating on that, because I see God has a message for you.
Yeah.
And the message is death.
Yes. Well, and the deliverance is from God. It's just with that grayness of exactly like, was this the way that God intended for it to happen? Probably, but then you at least raise the God is able later on to use the evil actions of other people to accomplish his will. Like that is definitely something that God is able to do, and he does it all the time. And if we think about that, like if God required his servants to be perfect and to always act in the right way for God to be able to accomplish anything, well, God wouldn't accomplish anything, and that would be a problem. So it doesn't have to be a mark against God if Ehud is going off script here. Regardless, even if we take the decline of the narrative, Ehud's still towards the beginning of it. So still, we should view him as a generally positive example with a good result that's going to help us as we kind of get further into the decline later.
See, there's where for me was the problem, because if he did that on his own, that's either a revenge or an evil act, and that is really the opposite than what God wants. He doesn't want you to go do that,
Right.
for your own. I mean, he didn't punish him for it, so that's speculation. So
I know, but later on in Judges, God is going to use people who are doing things the wrong way. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
here in this instance, for me, I don't think it was an evil thing. I mean, I think it's highly likely God told the message was kill this guy,
Yeah.
and I doubt if he was specifically going to stick the knife in and
Yeah.
do this, but the demoralization of killing him that way
Yeah.
would have affected the army and everybody else. How someone could have got close to that king like that?
Yeah.
Because that was not an easy task.
No, it's not. And
Walk in and hey, how you doing?
yeah. And that had the effect that God wanted it to. Like the point was to embarrass Moab, and they were embarrassed. They were demoralized. They have endured a great dishonor here by Eglon being killed in this way. It just still is interesting to me that we've moved from Othniel overwhelming and defeating to now Ehud assassinating. And there is a subtle difference between the two that's going to, if it were just those two, then maybe it wouldn't be as big of a deal. But in the whole context of a narrative of Judges, we're going to walk down a lot further than that. Mark?
Yeah, and then by the time you get to Samson,
Yeah.
it's like, wow. And it's just like you say, God will use whatever means to accomplish his end. And we see that he's using men to accomplish whatever, and if it's a very sinful man, he'll use that guy too.
Sure.
And when it comes to the Christ, he uses extremely sinful men to accomplish what he wants, and this is the foreshadowing of the ultimate deliverer, who isn't a sinner.
Right.
And that's, this, all of the precursors to that are fallible. I don't care
Yes.
who we're talking about.
Yeah, even Othniel compared to Jesus is. So.
David,
Yeah.
whoever we're talking about.
Yeah.
They're fallible. And so it brings out, when you read through Hebrews, it brings out that
Yeah.
perfectness of the Christ.
Yeah, if God is able to use Moab to accomplish his will in oppressing Israel, and Moab was evil and, and not righteous at all, if God is able to use Judas's betrayal of Jesus to accomplish something good, and the arrogance of the scribes and the Pharisees and the evil of Rome in order to accomplish the salvation of the world through the death of Jesus, he can use anyone for his purpose. The interesting story of Judges is that slow walk down that we get. Betty?
Well, the interesting thing is, we know that the Lord raised him up
Right.
for purpose, and they had rest for 80 years,
Yeah.
a long time for them.
So it's good, right? So like even as we're kind of like ragging on Ehud, at the same time he was raised up by God, and there was 80 years. So then on that other hand, like how much can you criticize Ehud? The point here is I don't want you to take away from this that Ehud was this intensely evil man who did all these bad things. The point is it makes you raise an eyebrow at exactly the methods that were used and the disturbing lack of specific instruction from God in this. God has used Ehud. This has accomplished a good thing. Moab is defeated and embarrassed. And Ehud is a generally good and righteous example, especially when compared to the ones we're going to get to as we continue on. Okay, thank you, everybody. Next week, we will very briefly talk about Shamgar because he is just one verse. So we'll talk about what he does and move on into chapter 4 as well. Thank you.